I still remember the click of the camera shutter. It was such a small sound, really, a tiny click, like a clock hand moving forward. But that sound, it carried the weight of betrayal. Because, at that moment, I realized something. My family, my very own blood, had just taken a picture of themselves without me in it. As if I didn't exist. As if my face, my smile, my history with them, meant nothing at all. Have you ever felt the sting of being erased while still alive? To stand in the corner of your own home, watching people who carry your name smile wide, lock arms, and capture a moment you're excluded from? That picture wasn't just a photo. It was a message. A message that said, you don't matter anymore. You're just a shadow we've decided to crop out of the frame. And let me tell you something. I might have gray in my hair, wrinkles on my hands, and a slow step in my walk, but I was not invisible. I was not finished. And that day, when they thought they had erased me, I made a quiet promise. If they wanted me out of their picture, then I would make sure the world saw the real one. But before I tell you how I turned their perfect little photograph into their biggest shame, you need to understand how we got here. Because betrayals like this don't happen in one day. They build, like cracks in a wall. Silent at first, then widening, until the whole thing comes crashing down. It began with little things, a missed phone call, an empty chair at Sunday dinners, whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. My children, my grandchildren, slowly, they pulled away, like my presence was too heavy for them to carry. And I, foolishly, kept telling myself it was nothing. That family drifts. That life gets busy. That love doesn't just disappear. But love does fade. Especially when selfishness, greed, and pride take its place. And I was about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way possible. So lean closer. Because what I'm about to share isn't just my story. It's a warning. A truth families don't want to admit. Sometimes, the people you give everything to are the very ones who want you erased. I wasn't always invisible. Once upon a time, my house was alive with voices, footsteps, and laughter that spilled into every corner. My kitchen smelled of bread baking, and the table was always set for more people than it could hold. My children would run through the hallways, their hands sticky from jam, their voices calling out for me like I was the sun itself, something they couldn't imagine living without. I gave them everything, my best years, my health, my patience. I worked when I was tired. I cooked when I was sick. I stood by their bedsides during fevers, dried their tears when their hearts were broken, and clapped the loudest at every graduation, every milestone, every little victory. I was the anchor of their world. But anchors, you see, are only useful when someone wants to stay tied to you. And slowly, my family began to drift. It started so subtly, I almost missed it. A skipped phone call on a birthday. An excuse about being too busy to visit. One of my daughters started sending her children over less and less, and when they did come, they sat in silence, their eyes fixed on glowing screens instead of talking to me. I told myself it was just the new generation. Times were different. Then came the gatherings. The dinners where they once fought over who would sit beside me became quieter, colder. My words, once listened to like scripture, became interruptions, brushed aside with polite nods or hidden eye rolls. And every time I noticed, a tiny crack formed inside me. One evening stands out sharper than the rest. I had spent all day preparing a meal, their favorite meal, a recipe passed down from my own mother. The kind of food that carried history, memory, love in every bite. They arrived late, already fed, and barely touched the dishes I had poured myself into. "Mom," one of them said, smiling with a voice dipped in pity, "you didn't have to go through all this trouble. We're trying to cut down on heavy food anyway. It's not good for the kids." I smiled back. What else could I do? But inside, it felt like the kind of slap no hand ever needs to deliver. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the table, staring at plates still full, food growing cold, and realized, for the first time, that I had become an afterthought in my own family. The distance only widened. My advice was no longer sought. My stories were no longer heard. I was too slow to keep up with their pace, too old to fit into their new world. And without saying it aloud, they began to treat me as though my chapter had already closed. Then came the photo. That cursed photo. It was a sunny afternoon. They had all gathered. My children, their spouses, their children. My living room buzzed with chatter, and I remember standing off to the side, watching with quiet joy as they laughed and hugged. The photographer, a friend of one of my sons, set up his camera in the garden. Everyone was called outside. Everyone, but me. I thought, at first, it was a mistake. Maybe they'd call me in a moment. I waited at the doorway, smoothing the wrinkles of my dress, ready to step into the frame, like I always had. But the call never came. I watched from behind the glass as they arranged themselves, children in the front, couples in the middle, siblings with their arms around one another. I could see their smiles. I could hear the laughter. And then came the click. That sound, that little click that marked the exact moment my family erased me. I remember clutching the window frame so tightly my knuckles went white. My heart pounded, not from anger at first, but from confusion. Why hadn't they called me? Why was I standing alone, like a ghost watching someone else's life? Later, when I asked, their answers were casual, almost careless. "Oh, Mom, we didn't think you'd want to stand for so long. We thought you'd be more comfortable inside." Another voice chimed in. "Don't worry, we'll take one with you next time." Next time. As if love and belonging could be scheduled, postponed, rationed out like scraps. That was the moment, the exact moment, when sorrow began to harden into something else. Something sharper. They thought they were protecting me from discomfort. What they were really doing was protecting their perfect image from being burdened by me. They didn't want me in their picture, because I didn't fit their idea of who they wanted to be seen as. And in that instant, I understood the truth. I wasn't just being left out of a photo. I was being left out of the family story. They thought I would accept it. That I would fade quietly into the background, too weak, too old to fight back. But they had forgotten who I was. And from that day on, I decided, if they wanted me out of their picture, then I would show the world the real one. After that day, the world felt different to me. Or maybe, I just started seeing it clearly for the first time. The photo wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of something deeper, something rotting at the heart of my family. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The little slights, the quiet dismissals, the way they looked at me, not with warmth, but with impatience. It was all there, waiting for me to admit it. I began to notice how my children spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. How they exchanged looks when I forgot a small detail, as though age made me less than whole. "She's slowing down," I heard one whisper. "We'll have to start making decisions for her soon." Decisions for me. Not with me. For me. The words stabbed deeper than they realized. I wasn't a child. I wasn't helpless. I had built this family with my own two hands, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now, they wanted to turn me into a dependent. A burden. An obligation to manage. One evening, I found myself standing at the edge of the living room while my grandchildren played on the floor. Their laughter should have filled me with joy, but instead, I felt something else. An ache. Because even they had started looking through me, past me, like I was furniture, not flesh. When I tried to tell them a story, one of them said, "Grandma, we've already heard that one," and turned back to their game without another word. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I was crumbling. The breaking point came not long after. We were gathered for another dinner, one I hadn't hosted, but had been invited to out of what felt like obligation. The conversation flowed easily around me, jobs, vacations, new purchases. I tried to join in, tried to share something small about my day, about the book I'd been reading. But before I could finish my sentence, one of my sons interrupted with a laugh. "Mom, no one even reads books like that anymore. Don't worry about it." The table erupted in chatter again. My voice drowned out. Forgotten. I sat in silence, staring at the faces of the people I had given my life to, and realized something brutal. I could be sitting in that room, or I could be gone entirely, and it would make no difference to them. That night, when I returned to my empty house, I didn't cry. No, the tears had dried up long ago. What I felt was sharper, colder, like steel forming in the fire. Do you know what it feels like to be underestimated? To have people you love look at you and think, she's too old to understand, too weak to matter, too tired to resist? It's almost laughable. Because in their arrogance, they forget one simple truth. The quietest person in the room often sees the most. I began to watch them more closely after that. I noticed the greed in their eyes when they talked about inheritances, the way they whispered about my house as if it were already theirs. I saw how quickly they could smile in front of others, painting the picture of a perfect family, while hiding the cracks that ran deep beneath the surface. They wanted me erased. Erased from the photo. Erased from the story. Erased from their image of perfection. But what they didn't understand was this: the picture they were painting was built on lies. And lies, my dear, have a way of unraveling. That was my breaking point. That was the night I stopped waiting for their love to return. I stopped hoping for their kindness. Instead, I started thinking about the truth. The real picture. The one they were so desperate to hide. And I made a decision. If they wanted the world to see them as flawless, devoted, loving, then I would make sure the world saw them for what they really were. Because I was done being erased. From this point on, I would not be silent. From this point on, every secret, every selfish act, every betrayal they thought was hidden, I would hold it up like a mirror for all to see. They thought I was too weak to fight. But they had just handed me the sharpest weapon of all, the truth. Once the decision was made, something inside me shifted. I no longer begged for their attention. I no longer hoped for their kindness. I wore their indifference like a cloak. And beneath it, I began to weave a plan. You see, they thought I was fading. That my memory was slipping. That my age had dulled me. But in truth, age sharpens some things, especially the eyes. I noticed what they didn't want me to notice. I remembered what they prayed I'd forget. So I started planting seeds. Quietly, patiently. I kept a small notebook tucked away in the drawer of my nightstand. Nothing fancy, just an old leather book with worn pages. In it, I began to write everything down. Every careless word. Every betrayal dressed up as a joke. Every moment they revealed who they truly were. My pen became my witness. Their actions became evidence. At dinners, I smiled and nodded, pretending to drift off, letting them believe I wasn't following the conversation. But behind that soft smile, I was listening to every word. I caught the way my eldest daughter complained about money, how my son-in-law bragged about the house they would soon inherit, how my youngest whispered that I couldn't handle things much longer. I remembered. I wrote. I built my case. And while I was collecting their words, I also started collecting their pictures. Not the glossy ones they posed for. Not the staged smiles they offered to the world. No, I captured the cracks. I snapped photos when they argued. When their tempers flared. When the mask slipped. A raised hand. A sneer. A glare when they thought no one was watching. My little camera, quiet as a breath, became my ally. I gathered it all. Words. Pictures. Proof. At first, it was just for me, a shield against loneliness, a way to remind myself that I wasn't imagining the cruelty, that it was real. But slowly, I realized I was building something larger, something powerful, something they could never take back once revealed. I also started to speak less. Let them underestimate me. Let them believe I was too fragile, too tired, too harmless. The less I said, the more they revealed. People fill silence with their own truths, and my silence became a mirror. Every time they dismissed me, I stored it away. Every time they rolled their eyes, I pressed it into the pages of my memory like a dried flower. They thought they were erasing me, but in truth, they were writing their own confession. And through it all, I smiled. I baked their favorite meals when they came over. I listened to their endless stories about promotions, vacations, purchases. I played the role of the quiet, fading mother. But behind my gentle eyes, I was calculating. Behind every nod, I was documenting. And with every passing day, my collection of truths grew heavier, sharper, more undeniable. They thought they had the perfect picture, but I was building the real one. And when the time was right, I would frame it so the whole world could see. Because revenge doesn't always start with fire. Sometimes, it begins with a pen, a camera, and the patience of a woman who has been pushed too far. Revenge is not a single act. It is a series of carefully placed steps, like stones across a river. And if you choose them wisely, you can cross without ever getting your feet wet. I knew I couldn't strike all at once. That would make me look bitter, unstable, the very things they already whispered about me. No, I had to be careful. I had to make each move seem like nothing at all, until the picture they had painted of themselves began to tear at the edges. My first move was small. A photograph. Not one they had staged, but one I had taken quietly, when they thought no one was watching. My eldest son, his hand gripping his wife's arm too tightly during an argument, his face twisted with rage. I slipped that photo into an envelope and mailed it anonymously to a distant cousin, someone with a mouth too loose to keep secrets. Within a week, I heard the whispers begin. Nothing loud, not yet, but the kind of whispers that travel fast in families. Did you hear about him? No. It can't be true. Well, there's a picture. My second move was even smaller. At Sunday service, when asked how I was doing, I smiled and said, "Oh, I'm fine. Just a little tired. It's been busy, with all the talk of my son planning what to do with the house after I'm gone." I said it softly, innocently, like I didn't understand the weight of my words. But I did. And I watched, as the ripple spread across the pews, faces shifting, glances exchanged. They wanted me invisible. But suddenly, people were watching them differently. And then, there were the stories. I had so many written down, little details they had long forgotten. Like the time one of my daughters borrowed money from me, and never returned it. Or the evening my son-in-law shouted cruel words in my kitchen, thinking no one but me had heard. I began to tell these stories in passing, not as accusations, but as memories. "Oh, I remember when you said this." I'd chuckle softly, leaving the room quiet in my wake. Each memory was a seed. And when planted in the right soil, a neighbor's ear, a friend's curiosity, a church gathering, those seeds began to sprout. But the most powerful move I made was silence. When they asked me questions about family matters, I gave half answers. When someone else asked about them, I smiled, but let the pause linger, long enough to suggest there was more to say. Silence, I discovered, is louder than words. It wasn't long before they started to feel it. My children grew tense in gatherings, snapping at each other, quick to defend, quicker to accuse. They sensed the shift in how people looked at them, though they couldn't trace it back to me. After all, what could I possibly do? I was just their old mother, their forgotten grandmother, the one they had left out of the photo. They had underestimated me. And so, while they fought to patch their image, I kept pulling threads. Not enough to unravel it all at once, but just enough to remind them that pictures, no matter how perfect, can always be exposed to the light. These were only the first moves. Harmless in appearance, devastating in effect. And the beauty of it was this: they didn't even see my hand at play. Because the greatest revenge is not when they know you've struck. It's when they don't even realize you've already begun. A lie can hold strong for years, sometimes even decades. But once a single thread is pulled, it doesn't take long for the whole thing to come apart. And I had pulled more than one thread. The whispers I planted began to echo louder. A cousin brought up the photograph of my son at a dinner, not with accusation, but with the sly curiosity of someone who loves a scandal. His wife flushed red, denying it with a laugh that rang too sharp. My son's jaw tightened, his fork clattering against the plate. People noticed. They always notice when laughter doesn't match the eyes. At church, I caught the sideways glances. People greeted me warmly, but when they turned to my children, there was a hesitation. The kind that feels like standing in a draft. Respect was slipping from them, like water draining from cupped hands. And the more they tried to grip it, the faster it slipped. Inside the family, the cracks widened. My daughters fought over money, loudly, bitterly, in front of relatives who pretended not to hear. My son shouted at his wife during a gathering, his temper raw and unpolished, no longer hidden behind polite smiles. They began to expose themselves without my help, tearing down their own curtain. And all the while, I watched quietly, calmly, a soft smile on my face, as though I didn't notice the storm I had set in motion. But I noticed everything. At one dinner, my youngest granddaughter, sweet and innocent, asked her father why Grandma wasn't in the family photo hanging in the hallway. The table went silent, forks frozen mid-air. My son fumbled, his wife stammered, and I sat there, folding my napkin neatly, letting the silence choke them before I answered softly. I suppose I wasn't worth remembering. You could have cut the air with a knife, and the seed I had planted in that child's mind would grow into something they could never control. Children remember. They always do. The unraveling spread beyond family walls. My son's business partner approached me once, curious about things he'd heard. I said very little, only that appearances can be deceiving. That was enough. Doubt is a stronger poison than truth. It lingers. It eats. Soon, they began to turn on me directly. Subtle at first, a sharp word here, a cold shoulder there. They thought they were punishing me, but all they were doing was proving to others what I had already suggested. The harsher they treated me, the more sympathetic I became to outsiders. The weaker they looked, the stronger my story grew. Their picture was fading. The perfect family image they had crafted was cracking, peeling, exposing the ugliness underneath. And I hadn't even raised my voice. But here's the thing about unraveling. Once it starts, it cannot be stopped. Threads do not mend themselves. And my family, so proud, so sure of their control, had no idea that by trying to erase me from their picture, they had made me the centerpiece of the story. I was no longer invisible. I was the shadow in every room, the silence after every question, the ghost they had invited by shutting me out. And I wasn't done yet. This was only the middle. The best, or perhaps the worst, was still to come. There comes a point when silence is no longer enough. Whispers become conversations, conversations become stories, and soon those stories grow into truths no one questions. I had been patient, deliberate, but patience has its limits. It was time for the world to see more than shadows. My first decisive strike came at a charity event my son was so proud to host. He loved to parade his wealth, his picture-perfect family lined neatly beside him, like trophies. I attended, of course. They hadn't wanted me there, but excluding me would have looked suspicious by now. I arrived in my simplest dress. Hands folded, eyes lowered, the frail grandmother they thought I was. And when the speeches began, I raised mine. Just one comment. Soft. Trembling. Almost innocent. It warms my heart to see such generosity, especially when one remembers the little debts still left unpaid within the family. The silence that followed was exquisite. People leaned in, curious, sensing the undercurrent. My son's face blanched. His wife squeezed his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. I smiled, sat back, and let the discomfort bloom across the room. That night, questions spread like wildfire. What did she mean by that? What debts? Is it true? I didn't need to say more. I had given them just enough rope, and they were already tying the knot themselves. But I wasn't finished. In the weeks that followed, I began releasing pieces of truth. Not accusations, but evidence. A bank receipt here, an overheard recording there, carefully slipped into the right hands. I let others deliver the blows, while I remained untouched. The quiet old woman no one suspected of such cunning. And the cracks deepened. My daughter, once so careful about her reputation, was cornered by questions she couldn't answer. My son's business deals grew shaky under the weight of doubt. His wife, who had smiled so brightly in that cursed family photo, now barely left the house, ashamed of the stares that followed her. The beauty of it all was how little I had to do. They had built their house of cards high and proud. I merely flicked at the edges. And the wind did the rest. At family gatherings, tension thickened until even the children felt it. My name was avoided. My presence, a reminder of everything they had lost control over. Once, my eldest snapped at me across the table, his voice sharp, his words cruel. The room went silent. All eyes turned, and I simply lowered my gaze and whispered, "After everything I gave you, this is how you speak to me." No one defended him. They couldn't. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on trial. They were. And the verdict was already clear in the eyes of those around us. This was more than revenge now. This was justice. Slow. Deliberate. Justice for every time I had been dismissed, ignored, erased. They had thought they could cut me out of their picture. But now the world saw the truth. The picture was broken, not because I was missing, but because I had always been the frame holding it together. And without me, it was collapsing. The unraveling had turned into ruin. And I, calm and steady, watched it all unfold. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited a lifetime to be heard. There comes a moment in every storm when the thunder quiets. Not because it has ended, but because the strike is about to fall. That was where we stood now, the lies fraying, the whispers turning into truths, and my family, cornered by the weight of their own sins. I had given them enough rope, enough time, enough mercy. Now, it was time to draw the final picture. It happened at the one place they believed was untouchable, the annual family gathering, the same one where they had once cut me from the photograph. They wanted their perfect portrait again, desperate to prove nothing had changed, that they were still the image of unity and love. But this time, I came prepared. As the photographer adjusted his lens, I stepped forward, calm, steady, carrying a small folder in my hands. No one noticed at first. They were too busy arranging themselves, fixing their smiles. I waited until the flash was ready, until they were frozen in their practiced pose, and then I spoke. "Before this picture is taken," I said softly, my voice carrying like a blade through the room, "perhaps we should show the world the real one." I opened the folder and revealed what I had collected: receipts, letters, recordings, every shred of truth they thought would stay buried. Gasps echoed. The photographer lowered his camera. My children's faces drained of color, their perfect smiles cracking like porcelain. I didn't need to shout. I didn't accuse. I simply laid the truth bare, letting silence do the work of 1,000 words. The room turned against them, friends, neighbors, colleagues, all seeing, all judging. The real picture, the one they had fought so hard to keep hidden, was finally exposed. And I stood in the center, not erased, not forgotten, but undeniable. They had once cut me out of their family photo, but now, I had framed the last one they would ever take. A portrait not of love, but of betrayal revealed, of pride shattered, of truth victorious. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible for so long, only to step into the light and watch those who tried to erase you shrink into shadows? It is not joy, not bitterness, but something far greater, justice. The flash went off anyway, and in that captured moment, their shame, their downfall, their broken perfection, it all lived forever. That was the final picture, the one the world would remember, the one they could never erase me from again. When the dust settled, I found myself sitting alone once more. But it was not the same kind of loneliness I had known before. Once, solitude had felt like abandonment, like being cast aside. Now, it felt like freedom. The family I had built, the children I had raised, had chosen to erase me. They thought they could silence my voice, diminish my worth, reduce me to a shadow on the edges of their perfect lives. But in trying to make me invisible, they handed me the greatest gift of all, clarity. I no longer needed their approval, their hollow smiles, their staged photographs. I had something far stronger, the truth. And the truth always outlasts even the most polished lies. Do you know what happens when someone is underestimated for too long? They become sharper, stronger, patient enough to wait for the exact moment to strike. That was my story. Not one of cruelty, not even of revenge, but of survival, of reclaiming a place they thought they could steal from me. Sometimes, late at night, I look at that old family photograph, the one where they had cut me out, and I don't feel the sting anymore. Instead, I feel something close to pride. Because I know now, no picture can define me. I am not a background detail, not an afterthought. I am the frame, the foundation, the quiet force that held it all together. And when they chose to forget that, they chose their own ruin. The final picture isn't the one hanging in their living rooms, staged and smiling. The final picture lives in the eyes of everyone who now knows the truth. And it will live in your eyes too, as you carry this story with you. So the next time you see a photograph, ask yourself, who is missing? Who was pushed aside so that others could shine? And remember, sometimes the person cut from the picture is the one with the power to change the whole story. That is my legacy. Not the erasure they tried to force upon me, but the truth I carved out for myself. And now, the world will never forget. Because I will never be erased again. If my story has settled somewhere deep inside you, if it stirred a memory, a question, or even a spark of recognition, then don't let it fade into silence. Share it. Speak it. Let others see the truth that so many try to hide. And if you want to walk with me through more stories like this, of love, betrayal, strength, and justice, then stay. Subscribe. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me what you would have done, if it were you. Because every voice matters. Every story has power. And sometimes, the smallest whisper can echo louder than the loudest lie. This is not the end. Just another picture in a much larger album. So take it with you. Carry it forward. And remember, I will never be erased again.